"I've made them howl," said Conan carelessly, turning from the window. "In my galley manned by black corsairs, I crept to the very bastions of the sea-washed castles of black-walled Kemi by night, and burnt the galleons anchored there, the hour of the dragon. At last he got leave of the steward, and gathered a small fleet, and he came to Umbar, unlooked for by night, and there burnt a great part of the ships of the corsairs. He himself overthrew the captain of the haven in battle upon the quays, and then he withdrew his fleet with small loss." The Return of the King. Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and I know this is a podcast that's been a long time coming, and that there are those doubtlessly impatient to see it since I first announced the idea for this video in our live stream with World of Conan, to whom this video is partially dedicated to. But this was a video I wanted done just to say right and needed time to study for. So without further ado, let's get started. How this podcast is going to start is with general outlines of the similarities of the two characters' backgrounds, and then I'm going to move on to their archetypes and character motivations. While it may not seem likely that there is a great deal of parallels between Conan and Aragorn, there were so many I noticed on my most recent read-through of Lord of the Rings, and on my listening to the BBC radio drama of Lord of the Rings, with the review for that pending at some point down the road, after October probably, that it kind of created this idea for a video. That said, we'll start with Conan and then move on to Aragorn, as Conan the Cimmerian is the far older character. Conan is from the far north, from the lands of Cimmeria, which are described as tempestuous and grey lands, with a great many hills, and as breeding tough men. With the Cimmerians descended from the Atlanteans, after the oceans drank Atlantis, leaving only a handful of survivors. Assailed by the Picts, they were to lose the majority of their culture and newly founded kingdom on the mainland to the Picts, so they were driven into a state of renewed barbarism that they can be found in by Conan's era. The Atlanteans, as they are shown in Kull's era, are a vengeful people, ones who aren't always exactly moral. They hold fast to their grudges and despise Volusia, the most preeminent empire at the time, being jealous of it. And they are, in all truth, a very special and unique people, who have as their classic enemies the Picts, who are the most barbarous of all the people of Howard's legendarium, so to speak. Though Burl the Spearslayer remains a fan-favorite character for a reason. As for Aragorn's backstory, he comes from the northern lands of Arnor, a land that was once a kingdom, but has since been torn apart by the Witch King of Angmar, so that all there is left is a great variety of towns, tribes, and barons, many of whom are squabbling between one another for dominance, with the lands being filled with hills and fairly similar in a lot of ways to Cimmeria, just in that how barbarous and full of hills and warring people there are. The Witch King himself was the chief most servant of Sauron, but Arnor itself had its roots in Numenor, which was the Atlantis of Tolkien's legendarium, with the Numenorians having begun as the very greatest of men, only to fall into depravity and grudges, and to have been consumed by the oceans, with the survivors fleeing to the mainland, where they founded two kingdoms, with the northern one being destroyed in the Angmar Wars that followed. Okay, so that's the first set of similarities between Aragorn and Conan. Both are hard men from the far north, descended from a people who were once proud in the peak of human civilization, only for them to have descended into barbarity and division. The next similarity is that both men had potentially close relationships with their fathers, with the motivation, or at least the initial one, of both men to begin their adventuring careers, beginning when they were in their adolescence. Aragorn, though, was raised in Rivendell, but only came into contact with Arwen when he was about 15 or 17. And I mention her because she is important. In his adolescence, that Aragorn seems to have fallen in love with her and swore to wed her. Her father, though, was to make Aragorn swear an oath to reclaim his rightful thrones of Arnor and Gondor before he weds Arwen. And so Aragorn sets out to become a ranger, living out for a number of years as little more than a wanderer and vagabond, fighting to ensure that others are safe and otherwise becoming, as described by others, as the most well-traveled man of the age. At first glance, this may seem quite different from Conan's motivation as a hero, but this is not exactly right, as Conan, in his teens, first comes into contact with Aquilonians, and fascinated by their culture and talks of their civilization, sets out for the lands of the Hyborians. Living as a raider, a thief, a ranger, a pirate, and a warrior for hire, Conan becomes the most well-traveled man of his age in turn, so that in time, he takes the throne of Aquilonia, after a lifetime of hardship. Once upon the throne, he has to fend off a great many attempts to usurp his crown. Now, where the similarity surges forth into the open is in The Hour of the Dragon, Howard's magnum opus, and easily the greatest of the Conan stories, not to mention the only classic Conan novel there is, with it being in this novel that Conan is dethroned completely and imprisoned. However, during his captivity, he is liberated by the untouched concubine of his enemy, Zenobia, a woman who in girlhood became fascinated by and fell in love with Conan before she was enslaved. Moved by her story, Conan falls in love with her and vows to retake his throne in order to marry her. In this way, the motivation of both characters by the time of The Hour of the Dragon and The Lord of the Rings, respectively, is one of love. They both hope to reclaim their lost crowns and wed the woman of their dreams. In this way, both characters are fulfilling a very particular role in the archetypal cycle of the classic knight/king in regards to his lady love/queen of love. Both Arwen and Zenobia play a key role here. They are both the goddess in the Campbellian sense, but also the queen of love who can only be liberated herself through the heroics of her beloved knight, who must overcome hardship in order to rescue her and become king. In this way, both Conan and Aragorn, who have lived as paupers for a time, are the legitimate kings of the greatest kingdom on earth and are semi-mythical figures in their own right, and both share the same motivation of reclaiming the throne, protecting their people and friends, and of marrying the woman of their dreams, and endure incredible hardship along the way. Hardship which has forged both men into solitary and knowledgeable ones, so that there is something inherently lonely about both figures, at least at the outset of their respective novels. It is not only this, but as blatantly stated in the quote at the start of the video, both of them pursue and boast the burning of pirate fleets that belong to their enemies as part of their accomplishments. What is more is that biologically, at the time of the novels, both men are roughly the same age to an extent. Conan is in his early 40s, whereas Aragorn, though he is quite a bit older given that he is a Númenórean, however, in Númenórean biological years, he is, according to the nature of Middle-earth, in his early 40s, or at least the equivalent biologically. Parallels don't stop there. Both men reject the temptation of Akivasha and Éowyn, respectively, though those two ladies are quite a bit different from one another in nature and motivation. They both are set against dark warlocks from a bygone age and have a rather strong loyal streak, whilst being incredibly pragmatic individuals. In terms of archetypes, we thus see that they embody the various aspects of the king, that is to say, the lover in regards to their bond to their ladies, the warrior in that they wage war to reclaim the throne, and the magician in their being mentors to younger heroes, as well as endowed with the blessings of the divine, respectively. Conan has the blessings of Mitra, at least if you go back to the Phoenix on the Sword, and Aragorn, one can argue, as he has Tuor, Eärendil, and even Melian as ancestors, and probably the blessings of Eru Ilúvatar to an extent himself, and that of Manwë, and of course Varda. He has a rather special and close link to the divine. As to the shadows that exist within both men, what is rather curious is how, over the course of both stories, both men plummet to low points, so that we see a bit of the Shadow King within them. They then pick themselves up near the beginning or middle of the narrative, respectively, with Conan likely stricken by having lost a great many of his chief officers and captured and imprisoned. He is, however, freed by Zenobia, though he has, to his shame, to leave her behind in the seraglio of his enemy in order to start to rally the people of Aquilonia to retake the throne. Aragorn, for his part, is distressed when Frodo takes off on his own and is divided about what to do next, so that he reluctantly sets out to join with Rohan and to reunify a semi-divided and weakened Gondor to fight against Saruman and Sauron. There are differences between the two characters, to be sure, but the similarities are the most distinguishing aspects of their characters and their decisions, in my opinion. The end of both stories, though, are notable as well, in that just how similar the two characters end up, with Aragorn and Conan fathering sons with their respective queens, with their heirs ruling well, if not as ably as the fathers. Both novels of The Hour of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings end essentially with the marriage of the royal couples, whether on page or not. These similarities, along with, and what I mean by that is that with Hour of the Dragon, it's implied because Conan says he'll make Zenobia his queen, whereas with Lord of the Rings, we actually do see the marriage. These similarities, along with others, such as the glorious manner into which the two claim their throne, pushing their way through their novels to unite a disparate people and groups to fight against darkness and all odds, is rather fascinating. Yet, as said, and likely as a comments section will point out, there are differences between the two characters. But I hope that with this video I managed to highlight some of the similarities. Maybe at some point after we do a book club podcast of the two novels, we'll do a side-by-side comparison podcast or something, as it might be interesting to find other similarities between the two characters and the two stories. Very likely I'll be making more of these sorts of videos in the future, and so if you want to stay tuned for them, do feel free to smash that like and subscribe button as though you were Conan and Zenobia tearing through the ranks of Sauron's followers.